Nathan thought it was just another court hearing. Until a hooded man appeared, calm, cold, and holding a key. He wasn't there for justice, he was there for Thor. But what came next, no one in that courtroom could have imagined. The courtroom was heavy with silence, the kind that presses down on your chest and makes breathing feel like a task. Every seat was filled, and all eyes were fixed on the man at the center of it all. Sergeant Nathan Carter sat in his wheelchair, dressed in his military uniform, the medals on his chest glinting under the fluorescent lights. His hand gripped the leash of the dog by his side, Thor, a German shepherd with a calm yet watchful demeanor. To everyone else, Thor looked like any other military working dog, but to Nathan, he was so much more. He was family. Nathan's jaw tightened as the judge addressed him, reminding him that this might be his final chance to speak. The army had decided Thor was to be reassigned, considered government property needed for another mission. After years of risking their lives together, the thought of losing Thor now felt like a cruel betrayal. Nathan's hands trembled as he adjusted his grip on the leash, his voice barely steady enough to speak. "Your Honor," he began, his tone raw with emotion. "Thor isn't just a military asset. He saved my life in ways no one here could ever understand. In the field, he pulled me from danger, shielded me from gunfire, even warned me of traps before I could see them. And when I came home, when I couldn't even face myself in the mirror, Thor was there. He gave me a reason to keep going. Please don't take him from me." The room remained utterly still, the air thick with unspoken sympathy. Some spectators dabbed at their eyes while others exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of pity and outrage. The judge's face remained neutral, his eyes studying Nathan for a long moment before he leaned forward, preparing to deliver his ruling. But before the words could leave his mouth, something unexpected happened. Thor stood abruptly, yanking the leash free from Nathan's trembling hands. The dog moved toward the judge, barking sharply, his voice echoing through the courtroom. The crowd gasped and the bailiff stepped forward instinctively, though Thor showed no signs of aggression. His barks were insistent, purposeful, as if he were trying to communicate something urgent. "Thor!" Nathan called, his voice breaking with panic. But deep down, he knew. He had seen this behavior before, countless times on the battlefield. Thor wasn't just barking, he was alerting. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. "What's wrong with the dog?" someone whispered from the back row. Nathan's chest tightened as he wheeled himself forward, his voice trembling. "He's not just barking. He only does this when there's danger. He's trying to warn us about something." The judge froze, his gavel forgotten in his hand, his eyes locked on Thor. The room fell silent again, except for the dog's barks echoing like a heartbeat. Whatever Thor sensed, it wasn't just about Nathan. The dog knew something no one else did, and for the first time that day, Nathan felt a flicker of hope. This wasn't just a goodbye. Something bigger was about to unfold, and Thor was determined to make them all see it. The room was silent except for Thor's relentless barking. Each sharp sound echoed in the vast courtroom, bouncing off the dark wooden walls and cutting through the tension like a blade. Thor's stance was low, his body tense, ears pinned back and eyes locked on the judge's bench. Nathan's grip tightened on the armrests of his wheelchair as he watched the dog. This wasn't random barking. Thor's body language was unmistakable. He had detected something. Nathan's heart pounded, a rush of adrenaline reminding him of moments on the battlefield. But this wasn't war. This was supposed to be a courtroom, a place of order. "Thor, heel!" Nathan called, his voice firm but trembling. Thor briefly glanced back at him, his gaze sharp, as if to reassure his handler that he was in control. Then, without hesitation, Thor returned his focus, pacing in short, deliberate steps in front of the judge's bench. His barks shifted to deep, guttural growls that sent a shiver through the room. The audience began murmuring nervously, the earlier sympathy for Nathan now morphing into palpable unease. "Mr. Carter," the judge said, his tone laced with irritation. "Control your dog or I will have to." "Your Honor," Nathan interrupted, his voice louder, steadier, though his chest tightened with fear. Thor isn't misbehaving. He's trained to detect threats, bombs, explosives, danger. He wouldn't act like this unless he felt something was wrong. The room fell silent again as Nathan's words settled in. His explanation shifted the atmosphere, replacing skepticism with a creeping sense of dread. Before anyone could respond, Thor suddenly stopped barking. The abrupt silence was jarring, almost deafening. Thor's body went completely rigid as his head snapped toward the far end of the courtroom. His ears perked sharply, and a low, menacing growl rumbled from his chest. The shift was so sudden, so intense was the moment, that even the judge froze. All eyes turned toward the heavy wooden doors leading into the courtroom. A collective unease settled over the room, and the murmurs turned into panicked whispers. Nathan's breathing quickened as he followed Thor's line of sight, his pulse thundering in his ears. He had seen this exact behavior before, on the battlefield, moments before Thor uncovered a buried explosive or signaled an enemy ambush. Whatever Thor sensed now wasn't good. "Thor," Nathan whispered, his voice breaking with tension. What is it?" But Thor didn't move. His entire body remained locked in place, his growl growing deeper, vibrating through the air like a warning. Whatever danger he had detected was no longer just a threat to Nathan. It was something that could put everyone in the room at risk. The low growl from Thor reverberated through the courtroom like distant thunder, freezing everyone in place. All eyes were fixed on the dog, his body tense, his gaze locked on the heavy wooden doors at the far end of the room. Even the judge, who moments ago had been prepared to reprimand Nathan, now seemed unnerved. His gavel remained forgotten in his hand as he exchanged uneasy glances with the bailiffs. The air felt electric, thick with a tension no one could explain. Nathan's breath came faster, his hands gripping the armrests of his wheelchair, as if bracing himself for a blast. He had seen this before, too many times to count, on the battlefield. Thor's instincts had been the difference between life and death. His warnings had always meant one thing: danger was close. Very close. "Stay calm," Nathan murmured to himself, but the words felt hollow even to him. The bailiffs, unsure how to proceed, hesitated by the judge's bench. One of them, a man with a broad frame and a wary expression, finally stepped forward, his hand resting on the weapon at his hip. "It's just a dog, right?" he muttered, though his voice betrayed his own unease. "Probably reacting to the noise, or the crowd." But even as he spoke, his steps were cautious, his movements deliberate. Nathan shook his head, his voice rising just enough to cut through the murmurs. "No. Thor doesn't react to noise or people like this. He's trained to sense danger, things we can't see. Trust me, if he's growling like that, there's a reason." His words hung in the air. For a moment, no one moved. The judge, visibly unsettled, finally nodded at the bailiffs, motioning for them to investigate the door. Thor's growl grew louder as the bailiffs approached. The larger man reached out hesitantly, his hand gripping the metal handle. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Nathan's heart pounded as he watched, every muscle in his body coiled with anticipation. Thor's body remained rigid, his growls turning into a series of sharp, clipped barks as the handle began to turn. The door creaked open, revealing the dark hallway beyond. At first, it seemed empty, but Thor's barking only intensified, his eyes fixed on something unseen. The larger bailiff took a step into the hallway, his hands still on his weapon. He glanced back at the courtroom, his face pale, then turned forward again. A second later, his voice broke the silence. "There's something here." Nathan's pulse quickened as he leaned forward in his chair, his chest tight with dread. Whatever that something was, it was enough to make Thor's instincts flare to life. And Nathan knew better than anyone, Thor was never wrong. The air in the courtroom seemed to grow heavier, as if the tension itself was pulling the oxygen from the room. Thor's barking ceased sharply, each sound having echoed off the wooden walls like a siren. His body remained locked in a stance of pure alertness, muscles taut, head low, and gaze fixed like a laser on the dark hallway beyond the open door. The larger bailiff, now visibly uneasy, took another hesitant step forward. His boots clicked softly against the tiled floor. His hand hovered near his weapon, his body stiff with caution, as though expecting something to lunge out of the shadows. "What's going on out there?" the judge demanded, his voice cracking slightly despite his attempt to maintain authority. He gripped the gavel tightly, his knuckles pale, eyes darting nervously between the doorway and Thor. The dog's growls deepened, a low, menacing rumble that vibrated through the courtroom and sent shivers down the spines of everyone present. The larger bailiff glanced back toward the room, his face pale and tight with uncertainty. "I don't see anything," he said hesitantly, his words measured. "But something doesn't feel right." His gaze shifted back to the hallway, his brow furrowed, as if trying. The bailiff's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried through the silent room like a gunshot. "It's quiet. Too quiet." Nathan leaned forward in his wheelchair, his stomach twisting into knots. He had heard those words before, "too quiet," countless times on the battlefield, and they had always preceded disaster. His voice rose sharply, cutting through the murmuring crowd. "Thor doesn't react to nothing. If he's acting like this, there's a reason. We need to evacuate the room, now." His command rang with urgency, but the spectators froze, paralyzed by fear and confusion. The smaller bailiff stepped forward, drawing a flashlight from his belt and aiming it into the hallway. The bright beam cut through the shadows, illuminating the polished floor. "There's nothing," he muttered uneasily. "It's just an empty hallway." But even as he spoke, his hand trembled slightly, betraying his forced calm. Thor, however, was far from calm. His growling grew louder, more frantic. His body strained forward, almost yanking the leash from Nathan's grip. Then suddenly, a sharp, metallic clang echoed from the hallway. The sound was unmistakable, jarring in the suffocating silence. The smaller bailiff flinched, his flashlight beam shaking as he instinctively stepped back. Thor lunged toward the sound, barking ferociously, his claws scraping against the floor as he fought the leash. Gasps erupted from the courtroom. Panic rippled through the crowd. The larger bailiff instinctively drew his weapon, his voice tight with alarm. "What the hell was that?" Nathan's heart pounded as he raised his voice above the chaos. "Get Thor back!" he shouted, his voice trembling with fear and certainty. "He's never wrong. Something's coming." Before anyone could respond, the metallic clang echoed again, louder this time, closer. The air felt thick, charged with an invisible energy that sent a wave of dread through the room. Whatever Thor had sensed, it was no longer a question of if. It was now a matter of when. The sound rang again, sharper, like an alarm bell from deep within the shadows of the hallway. The tension in the courtroom snapped taut. Thor barked with wild urgency, his body straining as though sheer willpower could force him through the doorway and into the unknown. Nathan gripped the leash tightly, his knuckles white, pulse pounding in his ears. He could feel it now too, something was wrong. Something was coming. The larger bailiff stepped fully into the hallway, gun drawn, his eyes scanning the dim corridor. His partner followed cautiously, the flashlight beam quivering in his hand. The beam swept through the darkness, but the hallway appeared empty, silent and still. Yet Thor didn't relent. His barking intensified, his growls now deeper, more insistent. Nathan's instincts screamed at him to act, to shout again for an evacuation, but fear gripped the room like a vice. No one was moving. "Do you see anything?" the judge called out, his voice cracking as he leaned forward. The gavel trembled in his hand, his usual authority replaced with visible fear. The larger bailiff glanced over his shoulder, his face glistening with sweat. "Nothing yet," he said quietly, his tone tight. "But it doesn't feel right." He took another step into the hallway, the sound of his boots echoing like thunder. The spectators whispered nervously. Some clutched their belongings, others inched toward the exits. The energy in the room was unraveling, panic spreading like wildfire. Nathan wheeled forward slightly, his eyes fixed on Thor. The dog had gone completely still. His ears were rigid, body motionless, gaze locked on the dark doorway. Thor's locked onto something, Nathan said, his voice shaking. I don't know what it is, but it's there. And then, it happened. As the bailiff reached the halfway point in the hallway, a shadow moved. It was brief. Barely perceptible. But enough. The smaller bailiff stumbled backward, his flashlight beam jerking wildly. There! He shouted, voice laced with panic. The larger bailiff froze. His gun snapped up, aimed at the darkness. Thor erupted again, barking ferociously, lunging so hard that Nathan nearly lost his grip on the leash. Back up! Nathan shouted. Get out of there! The judge slammed his gavel in an attempt to regain control, but the sound was swallowed by the chaos. People were rising from their seats, murmurs turning into shouts as fear consumed the courtroom. Then, from the hallway, another sound emerged. A footstep. Heavy. Deliberate. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't panicked. It was calm. And it was getting closer. Thor's barking turned into a deep snarl, his teeth bared, his entire body rigid with alert. The presence pushed forward with unrelenting force. Nathan felt his chest tighten as dread flooded his body. Whatever was in that hallway, it wasn't hiding, and it wasn't in a hurry. It was coming, straight for them, and it wanted to be seen. Another heavy footstep echoed, louder than before, slicing through the courtroom chaos like a blade. Thor's snarls ripped through the air, savage and unrelenting, his entire body straining against the leash. Nathan had to anchor himself in his wheelchair to keep from being pulled forward. The tension in the room was now suffocating. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the yawning darkness of the hallway, the source of the sound no one wanted to face. Everyone stay calm, the judge barked, slamming his gavel again. But the command fell on deaf ears. People were rising from their seats, clutching purses, backpacks, anything, as if holding something, anything, might shield them from what was coming. In the hallway, the larger bailiff stood frozen, his weapon raised and locked on the shadows. His partner remained just behind, the flashlight's beam jittering with every tremor in his hand. It darted across the walls, catching brief glimpses of movement, but offering no solid explanation. Get out of there! Nathan shouted, his voice sharp, urgent, cutting through the noise like a siren. Whatever it is, it's not safe! His warning hung heavy in the air, undeniable now. But still, the larger bailiff didn't move. Instead, he squinted deeper into the corridor, lips pressed into a tight line. Then the shadow moved again. This time, unmistakably, slow, deliberate, purposeful. The smaller bailiff gasped aloud, flashlight jerking wildly. There's someone there, he stammered. His voice trembled with disbelief. For a fraction of a second, the light caught it, a silhouette, tall and looming. And then it vanished, slipping back into the darkness like a phantom. But it was enough. A wave of fear rippled through the room, palpable and contagious. The larger bailiff stiffened, his grip tightening on his weapon. His voice came steady, but low. Show yourself! He barked. Step out where I can see you! Only silence answered. A thick, pressing silence that dragged on like an eternity. Thor's barking hit a fever pitch, snarling now, his muscles coiled like a spring. Every instinct in him screamed to attack. And then, it stepped into the light. A figure. Slowly. Calmly. Unnervingly so. It was a man, face obscured beneath a hood, hands buried in the deep pockets of a heavy coat. He moved with eerie stillness, each step deliberate, as though he had all the time in the world. He stopped just at the edge of the flashlight's beam. His head tilted slightly, as if amused. Thor's growl became feral. His claws scraped against the wood floor as he lunged again, the leash straining taut in Nathan's fists. Who are you? The larger bailiff demanded, his weapon trained with unwavering precision. The man didn't answer. He simply took another step forward. A hint of a smirk curled beneath the shadow of his hood. Nathan's breath caught. Every fiber of his being recoiled. There was something wrong about this man, not just threatening, but unnaturally wrong. as if whatever stood before them didn't belong in the realm of ordinary danger. Then, slowly, the man raised his hands. The motion sent both bailiffs tensing, fingers curling around their triggers. "Relax," the man said. His voice was low, cold, and eerily calm. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." But the way he said it, the deliberate softness, the hollow tone, only made the air feel colder. Nathan knew. He was lying. And Thor knew it too. The room sank into stunned silence. The stranger stood there, half illuminated in the flickering beam. Thor's growls pulsed in the space between them, low and guttural, reverberating through the wooden panels of the courtroom. Both bailiffs held their ground, weapons steady, but their hands were trembling now. Years of training couldn't erase the instinctive fear crawling up their spines. Nathan's heart pounded in his ears. The man's movements were too calm, too measured. Like he thrived on the unease unraveling the room. "Step forward." Slowly, the larger bailiff commanded. His voice still bore the weight of authority, but now a crack ran through it. The man tilted his head, obscured face unreadable. And then, he moved again. One step. Boots clicking softly against the floor. Unhurried. Thor exploded into a frenzy, barking wildly, snapping his jaws. Nathan gritted his teeth, holding the leash with shaking hands, sweat slicking his palms. "Thor, no!" he muttered under his breath. "He knows, he can feel it." The words weren't loud, but the judge turned to glance at Nathan, eyes wide with fear and confusion. The smaller bailiff stepped forward, the beam of his flashlight trembling. One hand hovered near his holster. "Sir," he said, his voice cracking under the weight of what none of them understood. What are you doing here? Identify yourself. Now." The larger bailiff's voice cracked through the courtroom like a gunshot. The man finally lifted his head. His face remained mostly hidden beneath the hood, but what little was visible was enough: sharp, angular features, and eyes like ice. Cold. Piercing. They locked with Nathan's, and for a heartbeat, Nathan felt as if those eyes could see through him. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," the man repeated. His voice was calm, too calm, empty of emotion, almost hollow. Something in its tone made Nathan's skin crawl. Then the stranger slowly reached into his pocket. Both bailiffs snapped to full alert, weapons rising as a collective gasp swept through the courtroom. A voice whispered from the back, trembling with panic. "He's got something." The room was on the brink. A fragile thread stretched to its limit. Nathan's instincts screamed at him to move, to act, to do anything, but he sat frozen, white-knuckled around Thor's leash, as if letting go would send him spiraling into the unknown. The man's hand emerged, holding something small and metallic. "Drop it!" The bailiffs shouted in unison, their weapons locked onto him. He froze. Then smiled. "Relax," he said smoothly. He held the object up, letting it catch the courtroom's dim light. A key. Just a key. But Nathan's unease deepened. There was no relief, no release of tension. If anything, the air grew heavier. Thor's growls didn't waver. His eyes never left the man. "It's not what it looks like," Nathan whispered under his breath. "He's hiding something. He has to be." As if hearing him, the man's smirk grew wider, sharper, and Nathan felt a fresh wave of dread roll through the room. The silence was unbearable. Every person in that courtroom was locked onto the stranger, eyes wide, lungs frozen, waiting for something they couldn't name. The key glinted again. "Drop the key. Back away," the larger bailiff barked, voice rigid with strain. The smaller bailiff took a step closer, flashlight trembling but steady, his face drained of all color. The man remained still, then turned his gaze directly to Thor. "That dog," he said, almost conversational. "He's special, isn't he? Always knows what's coming before anyone else does. That's what makes him valuable." A chill ran through the room. Nathan's blood turned to ice. "How does he know? How do you know that?" Nathan demanded. His voice cracked, part fear, part fury. Thor lunged forward, barking so violently the sound nearly drowned everything else out. But the man didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled again, too calmly. Too knowingly. "You'll find out," he said, his voice chilling in its certainty. "Soon enough." Then, click. He turned the key in his hand. A simple sound. But it hit like thunder. Thor exploded into a frenzy, barking wildly, twisting and straining in Nathan's grip. Then, the lights flickered. And went out. A breathless blackness swallowed the room. In the void there were gasps, shouted names, the scrape of chairs, the rising swell of panic. When the lights blinked back on, the stranger was no longer alone. Two new figures stood behind him. Silent. Still. They had come from the hallway like phantoms, tall, cloaked in shadow, their faces hidden behind dark masks. They moved with chilling precision, and both held weapons, gleaming, cruel shapes that caught the light in glints of silver menace. The courtroom gasped in horror. This was no longer a man with a key. This was a reveal. An opening act. And whatever was happening, it had just begun. Chaos erupted. Spectators shoved toward the exits, screaming, stumbling over chairs, pushing past one another. Bags hit the floor. Voices rose in confusion and fear. The two masked figures stepped forward with purpose, moving deeper into the courtroom like wolves entering a pen. Their presence alone drove a fresh ripple of panic through the crowd. Thor barked like a creature possessed, his body low to the floor, coiled, ready to strike. Nathan's hands shook as he held on, muscles screaming, adrenaline flooding every nerve. They're here for him. That truth crashed into Nathan with full force. Thor wasn't just a witness. Or a service dog. He was the reason. The stranger's voice rang out again, cold and detached. "You were warned. Everyone stay calm," the judge bellowed, slamming the gavel over and over, but the sound was meaningless now, lost in the whirlwind of panic. Thor lunged forward with a snarl. And Nathan knew. Whatever door the key had opened, it wasn't just literal. It was something else. Something worse. The judge slammed his gavel again, but his voice was swallowed by the panic swelling in the room. The larger bailiff stepped forward, holding his ground, flashlight fixed on the stranger. "Stay where you are," he commanded. But the stranger didn't stop. He took another slow, deliberate step forward. Calm. Unbothered. The two masked figures behind him mirrored his movements, amplifying the unbearable tension pressing down on the courtroom like a vice. Then the stranger spoke, his voice smooth, unnervingly measured, slicing through the chaos like a blade. "No one needs to get hurt. All I want is the dog." His words were calm, but the authority beneath them sent a chill racing down Nathan's spine. Thor growled low, never breaking his stare from the man, locked on like a sentinel who knew exactly what stood before him. Nathan's heart thundered. He pushed his wheelchair forward slightly, placing himself more firmly beside Thor, his grip tight on the leash. "You're not taking him," Nathan said. His voice trembled with emotion, but the resolve beneath it was steel. "He's not just a dog. He's my partner. My family. I don't care who you are, or what you think you're entitled to. You're not taking him." The words rang out across the courtroom like a challenge. And for a moment, everything stilled. Even the panic seemed to hesitate. The stranger's smirk slipped. His eyes narrowed, scrutinizing Nathan with unsettling precision. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be," he said coolly. His gaze flicked back to Thor. "He's special. You know that. But keeping him will only make things harder." Nathan's jaw clenched. He didn't flinch. "Thor stays with me." The crowd behind them was a sea of nervous whispers. Some called for calm, others whispered fears they barely understood. But all eyes remained locked on the standoff at the center of it all. Thor barked again, sharp, focused, commanding. A sound that pulled the room back into the now. The tension was razor thin. Nathan leaned forward, ready for anything. Whatever this man wanted, Whatever he was planning, he would have to go through them to get it. This wasn't just a service dog. This was loyalty. Love. A bond forged in fire. And Nathan wasn't letting go. The stranger stood motionless, eyes locked on Thor. Behind him, his masked companions paused, looming, menacing, waiting. No one moved. The judge cleared his throat, his voice trying to reclaim the room's attention. "You've disrupted a court of law," he said, mustering every ounce of authority he had left. "This ends now. Bailiffs, escort these men out." The command reignited the moment. The bailiffs moved, cautious, steady. Thor's bark rang out again, his muscles tense, eyes tracking every twitch of the intruders. But the stranger raised a hand slowly, stopping his companions with a single gesture. His expression shifted, not anger. Something else. Resignation. "This isn't over," he said quietly, his voice cold and ominous. "You think this is about the dog, but it's much bigger than that. You'll see. Soon enough." He stepped back. The smirk returned, but it was different now. Hollow. Calculating. "For now. I'll leave." He glanced at Nathan one last time. "But he belongs to us. And we'll be back." Nathan didn't blink. He didn't budge. "He belongs to no one but me," he said. "And whatever you're after, you'll have to go through both of us." His words were iron. And for the first time, the stranger faltered. Only slightly, but enough. He held Nathan's gaze for a beat longer, then turned without a word. His companions followed, vanishing through the same door they'd entered. The silence that followed was thunderous. Spectators slowly eased back into their seats, whispers rippling like aftershocks across the room. The judge exhaled deeply, his gavel now resting in a shaking hand. "This court is adjourned," he muttered barely above a whisper. Still, Nathan didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the door. Thor, finally sensing the immediate threat had passed, sat down beside him, but remained alert, his body still rigid. Nathan reached down and gently ran his hand over the dog's head. "You did good, buddy," he whispered. His voice trembled with exhaustion and fierce gratitude. As the courtroom emptied, Nathan stayed behind, lost in thought. He didn't know who that man was, or what he really wanted, but one thing was clear. This wasn't over. But for now, with Thor beside him, Nathan allowed himself one moment of quiet relief. Because whatever came next, they'd face it together. Their bond was unbreakable. And that was something no one, not even a man with a key, could take away. In a world full of unknown threats, one bond stood unbroken: Nathan and Thor. This was just the beginning. Stories True Vibe. Real stories. Real emotions. Every week. Subscribe now, more gripping stories await.